Ray. Many, many years.
I wouldn't admit that in public. We're on live in 5, 4, 3.
Thank you, Raymond Feist, for joining us today on Word of Mouth TV. It's such a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yes, about your new book, King of Ashes, the first in your new Firemane saga. Now, you've been engrossed in the Riftwar Cycle now for something like 30 years, right?
I know.
What does it feel like to emerge out of that into a brand new fantasy world?
It's a lot more daunting than I anticipated. You know, I believe in what I refer to as a writer's muscle memory. Mm-hmm. And a lot of things that I struggled with when I first started writing those many years ago, I just sit down and I do it. But what I've forgotten along the way was the lessons that got me there. And part of that was the comfort I had with the environment, the assumptions I could make without thought about how certain systems work socially and politically, and like magic systems and things like that. And starting from scratch, I had to revisit every single one of those and make new decisions. I wanted a world very different from Midkemia. I wanted different magic. I wanted no other races besides human sentient races. There are some magical beings, but that's a whole other discussion about plot. And I wanted the magic to be so similar to what we think about magic here in this world. In Midkemia, there are no atheists. Everybody knows somebody or has had direct contact with the gods or some manifestation. Uncle Jake over there, the frog in the corner, used to be a guy, a bloke, and then he said something wrong and the god hurt him and he's a toad.
Yeah.
Whereas in Garn, there is no overt magic of that level.
Yes, you get that feeling, don't you, that when they talk about the one true God, that there's a lot of skeptics, and you might believe in this, you might believe in that. There's got a far more sort of social.
Yeah, I took a chance.
Social background.
I took a chance when I created the Church of the One, that obviously is loosely based on certain different periods of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And I haven't quite got there yet in the second book, but what's essentially a lightweight Reformation kind of segment. Not about articles of faith, but rather about human politics.
Yes.
And the church as a alien presence politically, in the sense that it's not tied to a particular address. It's not feudal in the sense that, well, he's the third baron of that lineage, blah, 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 rather than he's the guy who got the job to come over here and be the episcopo, which is, Greek for bishop. And, he's playing his internal politics within the church. At the same time, he's playing external politics with the local nobility. And so it's a very different flavor from Midkemia. And the characters are somewhat different as well. And that was intentional. But what I didn't anticipate was how doggone hard it was going to be to get back into inventing new stuff mode that I haven't done for years.
Right. And so how long was it gestating? Because I just assume that there must have been a powerful drive for you to start something completely new. Or was it just because the old one ended?
That was a very large part of it. I think I underestimated how much of what I chose to do was the finality of Magician's End, and the idea that I had told all 5 Riftwar.
Have you ever wanted to write anything other than fantasy?
Oh, many times.
Yeah.
But my publisher explains the financial consequences of that choice. I think there's now some wiggle room if I want to do science fiction, or maybe a science-based, sort of like a Robin Cook or a Michael Crichton type, thriller with a scientific element, or another dark fantasy like fairy tale, for instance, or something like that. After I finish this trilogy, and it will only be 3 books, God help me, then I'll talk to my editors about what next.
On Word of Mouth TV, we like to talk about how food is handled in literature, and so just wondering what does food mean to you when you're writing? How do you incorporate it?
I have I mean, well, okay, in my real life, I have a very simple, straightforward taste. I'm kind of a steak and potatoes guy. You know, hamburgers are fine. As far as what I write about in the book, I have a couple of friends who are like major league foodies, and I incorporated a little bit of that when I wrote Talon of the Silver Hawk and King of Foxes. Prince of Foxes was Raphael Sabatini, and Exile's Return, and the character of Tal Hawkins, who besides all the other things he has this knack for being a really fine chef. And I incorporated a bit of that in the lore. And I did something which is essentially a writer's vanity. I created the concept of restaurants, which is a relatively late concept historically. And the only reason we have restaurants is the French Revolution.
Why is that?
Because after they shortened all of the aristocracy, their kitchen staff had nobody to cook for. So they would go into Paris and the other cities, and they would get storefronts, and they would open shops where they sold food.
Oh, and that's why you have that whole sort of French cafe
society. Yeah. Coffee trivia. The darker the roast, the less caffeine.
Right, I'll remember that. I'm not a coffee drinker, but my husband drinks coffee. So.
Yeah, the reason people think espresso is so strong is, one, it's very, very bitter, and also it's very small. So you get a lot of caffeine relative to the amount of liquid by pressing the steam through it. And so and if you get 2 or 3 of those in a hurry, it's like shooting up drugs. It's like you get a blast of caffeine. But if you're talking about long blacks, or filtered coffee, or what I call drip, I have a wonderful Cuisinart that actually grinds the beans in the top and then loads them down, and the water goes through. And I drink that all day long. I've been known to start at 6 in the morning and finish the pot at noon or 1 o'clock.
But you're right. Actually, it's wonderful to talk to an American about coffee, because it's not we don't have quite the same sort of thing here in Australia.
It took me a while to realize that if I wanted something remotely like what I drink, to ask for a long black.
Yeah.
And then you return the favor.
You don't have to go to England at all.
Right, and then I think it's actually the New Zealanders, I think, who return the favor by inflicting the long flat white on us.
Yes.
And I think that for me, food is occasionally useful in a narrative to reveal something about a character, a quirk. To have a convincing character, you need to show them do several things. Intentionality, obviously, and then I find that something that's habitual is useful.
Yes.
And then something that's gratuitous. And having the villain pet the dog is the old classic.
Yeah.
You want to show the dimension on the villain, you have the villain, pet the dog, or argue about food.
Yes.
Complain about how it's cooked, whatever.
Yes. The great levelers.
Yeah. It's the common things, the things that we all share to some degree or another.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. So, what is the best book that you've read lately?
Probably the book that sticks, I actually read maybe a little over a year ago, is a brilliant biography by Stephen Goldblatt called Will in the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare.
Right, okay, Will in the World.
Will in the World. And it's because the guy approached the entire investigation into Shakespeare's history differently than anybody else. And because of all the blanks in Shakespeare's life, Greenblatt started with the presumption, well, he was in Britain doing this. And one thing about Elizabethan England that very few people were is they were terribly, everything was documented. Everything, they had licenses and taxes, and you had to get permission to travel and fill out documents and things.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, he started with, Shakespeare's dad, who was apparently a very successful glover. And, he made gloves for, the nobility and the upper merchant class, whoever. But he fell on hard times because his father was a drinker, and apparently the family fortune. He married his wife because she had money. She was a widow with money. And inferring certain things from, like Shakespeare's will, where to his wife he leaves his second best bed.
Yeah, yes, I remember.
And those kinds of things are instructive.
Do you have a favorite cookbook?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't do that. As my ex-wife would tell you, Ray doesn't cook, he grills meat.
You fit in just fine over here.
Yeah,
we do that all the time. We call it barbecuing.
Yeah, well, okay. See, my friend Rich, who is my number one foodie in my life, his ears just perked up. And he said, "That's not barbecuing, young lady, it's grilling." No, my tastes are very straightforward. I mean, about the fanciest I get when I barbecued when I was married, I would go to my butcher and get a sirloin that was cut 3 inches thick. You know, so about 14 inches long, 3 inches thick, and I would marinate it overnight. And my favorite marinade is Cajun. Okay, and then I would slow cook that for about an hour. You know, slow cook it a half hour on each side. No, actually, because what happens is as it cools, the microscopic vessels, you know, in the tissues contract as they cool.
Yeah.
And holds the juices. And then you cut it on the bias. And you serve it, you know, with a little. I love it with, you know, especially if they're hot baguettes, French bread.
I love baguettes.
Little hard cheese, like a good, you know, Jarlsberg or a Swiss or whatever, and then, you know, some. See, I personally, I have a real problem digesting cooked vegetables. It's all my life. I was born that way.
Yeah. Do you write by hand?
Of course not.
No, so
No, there's a very long.
Amazing. Like we were just talking to Jennifer Egan, the Pulitzer Prize winner, and she writes all her first drafts by hand. And I just been talking to another author.
No, it's a long, boring story. The short version is I had a learning disability, and when I learned to type, I basically created new neural pathways.
Right.
So I didn't have the problems writing on a typewriter that I did writing by hand.
Right. Oh, that's
And in fact, first of all, I had to stop doing cursive early, and do block letters. And that I could do, sort of. And I still made spelling mistakes, but they weren't spelling mistakes in the sense that I couldn't spell, rather that my brain does weird things with letters. It's sort of like dyslexia, but it's not dyslexia.
Isn't it amazing, you know, and for somebody who is probably born to write in a way?
Well, I'm a storytelling guy, but when I learned to type, what happened is because the way they teach you to type is type these letters. So you're doing home row, and then you're doing reach and fall and all that. When I was doing that, because I wasn't trying to duplicate the shapes, but rather move a finger up, down, or, you know, to a letter, suddenly all new neural pathways were created.
Wow.
And suddenly I could write like a mother.
Oh, wow, so it was meant to be, wasn't it? You were born into the right time.
Well, my father once said, "Find what you love doing and conspire to get paid for it." You know, well, apparently I love to tell stories and I get paid for it.
Okay, well, Raymond Feist, thank you so much
Well,
for joining us
having
today
me.
on Word of Mouth TV. It's just been an absolute pleasure. I've been wanting to talk to you for a very, very long time.
Well, thank you for having me, and I must say, the entire approach to food and fantasy is intriguing.
Yes, it is.